The local economy has recorded a massive contraction in the second quarter as the country continues to battle COVID-19. The economy plunged by 51% when compared to the second quarter of last year. The contraction was broad-based across the different sectors, with construction, manufacturing and mining being the hardest hit. The only positive contribution came from the agricultural sector.
The latest GDP figures are a testament to the devastating impact COVID-19 and the lockdown have on the local economy. The second quarter is when the country was at higher levels of lockdown, restricting economic activity. This is the fourth consecutive contraction in GDP.
Looking at the slump of 51% of the economy, which is the highest we can ever know in the history of our country. And indeed, if you refer to recent times, only quarter one of 2009, following the global economic meltdown, had reported a negative 6.1% of growth.
The deep contraction is attributed to the sudden shock that impacted negatively on supply chains and on global demand and exports.
Mainly driven by a sharp hit to investment and, of course, consumer spending. Consumer spending indeed contributed 30% of the 51% drop in GDP. Looking forwards, we do expect to see a rebound in GDP, certainly in the third quarter, driven by statistical base effects. We're looking at about 16% rebound. But of course, to see substantial, faster economic growth will require a significant number of changes in the South African economy.
Some say there are worrying signs that the contraction in GDP for this year could be worse than earlier thought, dragged down also by the renewed load shedding. It is likely the country's unemployment problems will be worse, pushing many into poverty.
Just over 3 million people have claimed UIF payments. And of those 3 million, we expect about over 1 million of those people to have lost their jobs permanently. And with such a lackluster economic growth forecast in the preceding years of 2021, we don't expect the labour market to recover markedly, particularly without significant structural reforms.
There are calls for government to embark on urgent action to turn the economy around.
Government can do a lot to restore confidence, and I think one of the key things there would be dealing with the electricity crisis, because it's not just a problem now, it is a problem in the long run. And I think there the solution would be really to open up that market for competition and to actually take, not just say you're going to do it, but to actually implement the measures and the changes to regulation and legislation to make that possible. And then the second thing they can certainly do is change the rules around the tender system. They've been talking about government employees and elected politicians not being able to do business with government. That's a rule everywhere in the world. It should be a rule here as well, especially given our history with corruption.
Stats SA says gross fixed capital formation, representing fixed investments, decreased by almost 60% during the period. The main contributors to the decrease were construction works, machinery and other equipment. SABC News, Johannesburg.
Meanwhile, President Cyril Ramaphosa says that the slump in growth should spur all South Africans to do all they can to help rebuild the economy. He says the country should use this moment of crisis to build a new economy and unleash South Africa's true potential. To discuss what's needed to turn things around, I'm now joined via Zoom by the President of the Black Business Council, Mr. Sandile Zungu. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. Good to have you on the program again. It's been a while.
It has been a while, Peter, and it's so nice to be with you in your studio, and good evening to your listeners as well.
All right, so this figure, 51%, perhaps is what shocked us, but what we knew for sure is that it wasn't going to be good. And I guess what that translates into is that is what you've been seeing and feeling as business throughout this period.
Well, 51% looks like a massive contraction. But to be quite honest, within the Black Business Council circles, we were expecting slightly worse than that, based on not on our hunch, but also our experiences on the ground, the quality and the quantity of businesses that were experiencing difficulties. So it basically says at the end of this year, this whole notion of a 7.1% or so contraction is grossly understated. We expect anything close to 10% or slightly more than 10% contraction this year. To be quite disappointing, but it's something that we have to expect, simply because the devastating impact of the lockdown driven by COVID-19 was quite devastating to businesses. But South Africa is very resilient, and already the social partners are talking to each other to see how they can respond to the president's call that we need to rise up to the challenge. What is really needed is urgency, and we need to hasten to find solutions and implement what we agree on.
What might those solutions start to look like? Because before COVID-19, we were already an economy in recession. SMMEs were already feeling the brunt of the economic challenges. And with that, because they're their biggest employer, unemployment was rising. So what phenomenal things need to be done now? Because it can't be simple solutions.
Well, the solutions are very simple, contrary to your posit. The solutions are there, they've been discussed before. What is now needed is that we have to get into implementation. The ruling party and government have been speaking about infrastructure-led recovery. Let's do it. And the argument is that construction has got many ripple and positive effects in engineering and in terms of absorbing low-skilled employment. All wonderful. Of course, the key question is where will the money come from?
Right.
Because the fiscal is deeply stressed. But if the intention is to have an infrastructure-led recovery program, let's get on with it. Let's do it. And of course, there are other areas that require introspection. You know, it sounds like a scratched record, but we've been talking about the spectrum, the dreaded spectrum, digital migration. Now, spectrum in the area of broadcasting and cellular telephony. This can is being kicked for touch, is being kicked down the road, and now there's a further extension. It won't be until sometime next year that the spectrum will be auctioned and the wholesale open access network will be created. It's a year too late as far as we're concerned. Because if you want this country to be a major player in the area of fourth industrial revolution, Internet of Things, machine learning, which are driving entrepreneurship elsewhere in the world, then you better open that spectrum. At the moment, we believe that the stakeholders, whether it's CASA or whoever else it is, are just sitting on their laurel and doing nothing, whilst Rome is euphemistically burning.
All right, so construction-led recovery makes sense and it will help certain sectors. But what about the SMMEs? And these are the ones that we always look towards in terms of employment. How do we kickstart some of those? Because some of them by now have already disappeared.
Well, the truth of the matter is that South Africa likes to celebrate big things. We are mesmerized, we are starstruck by big things. The phenomenon that we'll call jumboism. Things that are small, simple, are not celebrated. The SMME sector holds the key to the recovery of this economy. The SMME sector holds the key to employment creation, and especially absorption of lowly skilled people into the formal economy. Yet, even when you look at the relief mechanisms offered by government, 200 billion rands given to commercial banks in the form of a loan guarantee scheme. Only 15 billion rands has been advanced. Why? Because the track record of commercial banks in terms of doing business with SMMEs is dreadful. And if you take into consideration the track record of doing business with black business, it's even more disastrous. So if we really are needing to change the game, we need to go fundamental. The commercial banks need to be persuaded to move away from the low-hanging fruits, which are dry. Unfortunately, some have disappeared, which is to advance lending to big multinationals or big business, as well as parastatals whose lending is underpinned by national treasury, to actually taking the risk that is required in the economy. You better believe in the SMME sector. You better believe in emerging businesses, especially black business, if we're really going to turn things around. And those who have got the sway over commercial banks need to begin to talk harder to them and not mollycoddle. Because without access to capital, SMMEs are dead. Without access to markets, especially markets such as government, as well as multinationals who need to absorb these SMMEs into their supply chain. We're going to talk about SMMEs holding a key until cattle come home. But all the fundamental ingredients to make SMME sector work are being killed and thwarted by those who have got the power, unfortunately. So we expect, someone to, yes, dangle a carrot, but at sometimes need to also whack the stick.
All right. Mr. Zungu, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed for sharing your thoughts with us tonight.
Thank you.
All right, that was the president of the Black Business Council, Sandile Zungu, talking that things need to get pretty serious and things need to be done, especially those that have been planned and already put in play should start happening and happening with urgency. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll start